So we're going to be using the orange Manjushri practice again. Okay, so just refuge in bodhicitta, and then we'll have the Dharma talk. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. And just letting that reconnect. And just as this is our reason for meditation, it's also our reason for listening to teachings, our reason for life. Okay, so Manjushri today, wisdom today. This is Manjushri, right? He's very happy to meet you. So Manjushri is depicted with a sword and with a text that a flower that has a text resting on it, right? So those are the two main pieces to kind of get clarified with the details. And he's depicted as similar to Chenrezig in the sense that he is youthful, about 16 years old. And 16 years old is because that is kind of the height of youthful vitality when you still have a lot of growing energy left. Like remember when you were 16, you still had a few more inches to go, perhaps. Some of us tapped out at 16, but some of us had a few more inches, right? And but you were sort of like almost your adult shape, but you were still like vibrant, right? Vitality. So it's not that Manjushri is 16. Okay, he looks 16. It's also not that he's orange. He looks orange. It's not even that he's a boy. He looks like a boy. All right, don't get trapped by form. Okay, with any of these depictions, there are archetypal energies that are represented in these forms. But these forms did come from the enlightened mind. It wasn't like regular people were like, how shall we draw wisdom? No, it was that actually these manifestations appeared to great meditators, and visualizing the forms as seen here or in the tankas has a great benefit and connects you to the blessings of the tradition. So it's like use the form, but don't get lost in the form. Be specific, be clear, emphasize as many details as you can, but don't get hung up in them. Does that make sense when you're visualizing? And when you're visualizing, it is an interesting dance of how many details can you hold without getting tight. And what can happen is that with any meditation, you get used to it enough that you're a little bit bored, and the boredom can actually be a good sign. It means you have a bit more space to add more detail. And that's part of the richness of Tantra, is that there's always more depth, layer, and detail. So there's no reason for your mind to ever kind of feel like it's got nothing to do. This is a multitasking meditation. And it's a multitasking meditation with all these layers that are working on all of the senses. And normally in our everyday life, it's the senses that are the troublemakers. Right? We're chasing sights, we're chasing sounds, we're chasing tastes, we're chasing touch, right? We're wanting stimulation through our senses. And when we're sad or bored or grumpy or whatever, we soothe ourselves through our senses. And what Tantra is doing is using the powers for good, right? Rather than like in a shamatha meditation where you're focusing on the breath, you're going, okay, I see senses. I'm aware that my senses want forms and tastes and sounds, whatever, and back to the breath. In Tantra, you're saying, all right, let's get organized, team. Yeah, let's get the senses to work for us rather than be the distractions we're kind of battling with. So you need both skills. You need the ability to be able to work with the attachments related to your sensory experiences and your aversions related to your sensory experiences, so you don't get lost in your senses. And so a lot of what just a basic single-pointed meditation on the breath does is help you disengage from that, as well as developing concentration. And then you move to Tantra and you start inviting them. instead of disconnecting from them. Yeah, but you need to be able to do both. It's not an either or, it's a both and. Yeah, they're two faculties. And you'll notice so much about these practices is about flexibility of mind. You'll kind of sink into a happy, kind of relaxed space. And then you're asked to open your eyes and read something. And then you're asked to say something. And then you're asked to do something, right? And part of you's like, I didn't want to. I was sitting quietly, feeling happy and relaxed. Don't make me open my eyes, right? And like snap out of it, right? And like, we don't want to get this kind of dreamy, wispy, vague space cadet thing with our practice. That is the opposite of practice. So any kind of practice, you should be ready to have a very clear focus afterwards. If you feel hazy and dreamy and sleepy after your meditation, something was up with your meditation where you were indulging sleep. Yeah, and vagueness. So there's two different things that might make you sleepy. One is that you're not getting enough sleep. So get more sleep, right? Don't overthink it, just like sleep more. The other is it's a temptation. Yeah, of like your mind lights shutting off and kind of going to dreamland. That's the one to challenge. So if you're noticing that sleep is really wanting to overtake you in your meditation, take a minute and say, am I just really tired? If I'm just really tired, maybe I need to push pause on my meditation, have a nap, and then come back. Like, let your body support your mind. Don't force it. Yeah. But it could be that you're actually getting plenty of sleep. And if you were having an interesting conversation, you'd snap right out of it and you'd be alert and perky. And if that's the case, open your eyes and look at the floor and let light in. Be aware of your posture, sit up more straight. Yeah, just basic things help so much. Take some deep breaths, have a sip of water if you need to, refresh yourself. Use a pressure point if you need to. Yeah, if you pinch your pinkies, sometimes helps wake you up. Yeah, pinch the pinkies. Yeah, and remember death. Death is coming, right? Death is coming. We don't know when. Remember, yeah. We really do have this thing like we've got all the time in the world, and we sort of do and we sort of don't, right? Young people die before old people every day. Healthy people die before sick people every day. But we have an innate grasping at permanence that is in a deep denial about that. And think about how efficient you are when you have a deadline, right? With whatever life thing, you have a deadline, like people are coming over, you suddenly clean the house with amazing efficiency. Yeah, they're coming in an hour, you're amazing, you get so much done. Things that normally take a week to do, house is clean, right? Yeah, if you care about things like that, right? But so if you're holding death is coming, it's not about triggering a panic, it's about triggering efficiency. It's about weeding out the things that are not useful in your life and about focusing on your priorities. And if every day you're remembering death, when you get to death, you won't have regrets. Yeah, if you're putting off thinking about death until death, you get to your deathbed and you go, oh crap, what was it all for? You know, so it is really worth, at least occasionally, I would say daily, but weekly, monthly, sometimes, just think on my deathbed, what will I think? That was time well spent. And what will I think? Yeah, I could have done with less of that. You know, so you picture yourself, say you're dying today, the end of the day, you know, in your room, in your tent, wherever you are tonight, that's where you're dying tonight. Will you think, oh, I really wish I would have seen season 2 of ... Right? Like, I really wish I would have read another chapter of ... I really wish I would have held a grudge longer. You know, and I wish I'd had a lot more conflict, actually. Yeah, a lot more conflict. And, you know, just a lot more angst and anxiety. I wish I had more anxiety and that I didn't deal with it even as much as I have. You know, more anxiety, more depression. Yeah, that would be good. You know, I mean, like really make it real for yourself. Like, And I'm sure that all of you have at some point, or you would not have arrived at a Dharma center to do spiritual practice. But what I'm saying is, on the spot in the meditation, when you're going into sleepy town and you're not actually sleep deprived, you've forgotten death is coming. And the real question is, do you want to keep doing what you've been doing the whole time? Or do you want to try something different, right? Like from beginningless time until now, we've been chasing the senses, we've been half awake, we've been indulging any number of attachment minds, and it has not led to our awakening. So you kind of like snap out of it, try something different. So you need a little bit of a abrupt little smack against the side of the head, and then a little gentle pat on the cheek, both given to you by yourself from yourself in the timing and pacing that you need. This is not coming from the outside. The Buddhas will never give up on you. The enlightened mind will never give up on you. It will never stop loving you. It will never stop having compassion for you. Okay? The compassionate mind of all the Buddhas loves Hitler, loves Osama bin Laden, has not given up on anyone, loves dung beetles, right? Like, you are not a lost cause, okay? This is for you, though. Do you want to keep hurting yourself? Do you want to keep hurting other people? A lot of that is from the distracted mind. Okay, so when you're doing a breath meditation and you think, what's the point of this? The point of this is training and focus so you don't hurt yourself and others when you stand up again. Yeah. And then hopefully you can elevate and upgrade into actually developing along the path to enlightenment and really being of direct benefit to others. But if you're having just these little challenges in meditation of, I don't really want to focus. Well, of course you don't. It's new. Don't beat yourself up. Wake yourself up. Do you feel the difference, right? Like what the internal conversation with yourself would be? Don't beat yourself up. It's totally normal that you would want distraction, that you would want sleep, that you'd want to vague out. Of course it is. And life is stressful. And maybe this is the first time we've stopped and kind of been still for a minute in ages. So maybe you do just need a nap, like have a nap, for goodness sakes, right? You don't have to be an old nana to have a nana nap, right? It's very healthy nap. Right? But if you actually have been getting enough sleep. All right, so when you're doing these practices, you do your refuge, your bodhicitta, not lip service, you engage. You do your four immeasurables, not lip service, you engage. And then optional, like we did this morning, is you can add Tonglen, but you don't have to. Right. And a lot of these practices have that kind of flexibility where you can expand them or shorten them based on your time. And so if you were to pick a practice to do every single day, I think that would be very useful, but it doesn't mean you're trapped in the form that you've chosen. On some days you can do the long expanded version, on other days do the short gentle version. The depth is built through continuity. Yeah, again and again and again, but it doesn't have to be identical what you're doing each day. It's just kind of the identical pattern and energy you're engaging with. Does that make sense? So there's flexibility within that. Yeah. So you do that, and then you do this Om Svabhava mantra. And the Om Svabhava Shuddha Savadana, Savava Shuddha Hum. This mantra you're going to see in a lot of tantric practices, and it's kind of the key to the whole deal. This really means all phenomena are empty of inherent existence, and that is their natural purity. Yeah, so on page 4, halfway down, that Savava mantra. And whenever you see that, it's your invitation to remember you and all phenomena have an essential purity, which is your emptiness of inherent existence. So feel like that it's a space of raw potential. It's a non-affirming negation, right? It's not implying anything in its place. When we say emptiness, we're not saying then something is arising yet. Let it live in the spacious potentiality. And then from that place, you start the visualization. So if you ever do highest yoga tantra, you're going to see this a lot, where basically everything dissolves into emptiness. And then from emptiness arises this. And from emptiness arises that. And then it dissolves back into emptiness. And then from emptiness, it arises again. And this back and forth stops you getting fundamentalist. This back and forth really helps you marry method and wisdom together. Okay, so it's really important to remember emptiness during these practices. We always try and remember it at the end when we do the dedication. But as you get more advanced into these practices, it's plugged in all over the place until eventually it's woven in with every single piece from your perspective, right? You're weaving it in, whether it's explicitly written or not. Because again and again, you're marrying up the ideas that there's the appearance, and then the appearance is empty. It looks this way, and it lacks inherence. And you're holding those two things together. And that cuts through your habit of ordinary appearance and grasping. Okay. Yeah, Doug, go ahead.
So the sorrow Dharma, is that Dharma is not, it's with a small d, right?
Small
So
d
it's like
Dharma.
just things, stuff.
Yeah, Dharma in some contexts just means phenomena. Yep, in this mantra, it's related to all phenomena. Yeah, Rio, did you have one earlier question?
No, I was just trying to do Manjushri.
Well done. All right. So then you go on to the visualization. So it's basically, remember, this mantra is saying the proviso of the rest of the visualization is that what you're going to visualize is empty of inherent existence. Don't get weird. Okay. And you'll notice in this morning, I shifted all of the words so that it was from the perspective of everything being in the space in front, because we don't know who has an empowerment and who doesn't. So I let it in the way for people who don't have the empowerment. So if you don't have the empowerment, everything with the visualization is in the space in front. Yeah, facing you. Does that make sense? So you start with this egg shape, right? Egg shape, and then in the center is the syllable D. And the syllable D is the seed syllable of Manjushri. And on the cover of your retreat packet, there's the mantra garland of Chenrezig with Hri in the center. And then there's the mantra garland of Manjushri with D in the center. So if you're ever looking for the seed syllable of whatever deity, it's going to be in the center of the mantra garland. And a seed syllable is basically the essence of everything the practice is about. Yeah. So the essence of wisdom, basically, the syllable D in the space in front, light emits, light emits, light emits, purifies you of all negativities and removes obscuration since beginningless time. And part of you is thinking, really? Just like that? Okay, yay, right? Then part of you goes, but probably not though. Yes? Or part of you's like, yeah, that's great. Depending on your personality, right? But part of you hopefully thinks, really? Huh. If it was as simple as that, I should have felt better afterwards, right? And again, remember, this is Tantra, where you're taking the result as the path, where you're ripening through rehearsal. So adopt the attitude that this is the case for a moment. Put aside your doubts about it for the moment. Identify as the future that will be. And then later, when you're up and out of your meditation session, you're holding that possibility while seeing the reality of the way the relative world appears to you and the suffering of yourself and others and all that stuff. So when you're having these tantric ideas, you're making sure that you're not getting into a strange dissonance with relative truth and worldly conventions when you're off your cushion. Suffering still exists, right? And I think that this is obvious generally to most people, but you maybe have seen some, kind of waifs or lost souls at Dharma centers or ashrams or Vipassana retreats or whatever that look really happy, dreamy, spacey, and a little funny, right? They're a little out of sync, and we don't want to get out of sync in that way. Okay. Now, when you're on your cushion, this becomes more and more real and more true, which means you're also getting closer and closer to it. And what's interesting is to think about someone who theoretically has developed the tantric path fully, like His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Okay. So we assume His Holiness the Dalai Lama is an enlightened being, completely and totally, right? He may or may not be, we can't tell, we don't have clairvoyance, but we assume seems to be the case. What is he like on a day-to-day basis? Is he weird? He's like the most personable, right? He's just sweet and kind, and then also brilliant and sharp, all of the different aspects, but he's like a human being you can relate to. Yeah, he's not being dreamy and spacey and saying suffering doesn't exist. But he's happy. You can tell. Yeah. You can tell he's happy, right? Body language, affect, energy, vibe. Seems happy, yeah. And it's also interesting to see what happens to him when he meets other people who are experts in their field. They might say something to him from the perspective of neuroscience or quantum physics or psychology, and they say it like this is a new breakthrough, right? New breakthrough in science. Guess what? Nothing inherently exists. And of course, His Holiness is like, I already knew that, but he doesn't say that. What does he say? Whenever some brilliant new discovery is shown to him that is something he already knows, that Buddhists already know, he says, wonderful, right? He doesn't need to show off. He doesn't need to show off that he already knows. He just says, wonderful. Someone else has come to this wisdom as well. So this is what a theoretically enlightened being does, right? Is there's no need to prove anything. You don't have to show anything. You can be a sweet, humble old man, a simple monk, but it's clear to everyone that he's more than that, or clear to most of us. Do you see what I'm saying, right? So there's this deep inner calm, happiness, contentment that he has. There's not ego, there's not pride, there's none of that. Yeah, but he's still very relatable, very human. And so when you get close to someone like His Holiness, there's also a very palpable energy of happiness and peace that he radiates. Yeah, if you've ever been in close proximity to him physically, you really feel like there's this radiating field, and you become often a lot happier and more blissful just by proximity. Yeah, and that seems kind of woo-woo and far out and new agey and whatever. And like, is it just my projection? Maybe, maybe not. But think about how obvious it is if someone is angry, right? Think about the opposite. Someone is palpably angry, right? Like viscerally angry, but totally silent, but they're sitting next to you. Can you feel it? Usually. Yeah, you're like, something's up over there. There is a disturbance in the force. Are you okay? You need a snack? Like if someone's viscerally angry, can't you feel it in your kind of almost in your bones? I mean, especially if you know them well and you know their body language and their history and story. But like, say the person or people you live with come home in a dark mood and it's a 2-story house. You're like upstairs minding your own business, reading a book. They come in, you're like, woo, something is happening downstairs. Yeah, if you're kind of like, present and tuned in, sometimes you can feel it like there's something up. Have I lost you? You know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
Yeah. So the same true is the good stuff, right? Like we're used to being aware of people being irritable and impatient and angry and kind of being able to feel that even with strangers. Like you're on the bus or on the train or something and they sit next to you. You can tell if someone's tense, even if they're being totally still, just by proximity and energy. A lot of us, if we're paying attention. If we're not paying attention, okay, that's another story. But if we're sort of like aware of our surroundings, you can tell when there's tense people. Yeah. And you can also tell when people are kind of like ready for a chat or like open for discourse. And we can kind of turn up the volume in our perception abilities, even though we're not clairvoyant, right? Just practice it, being aware of what's the energy of other people. Now, some people are overly aware of the energy of other people from trauma, right? Because they've had to be hypervigilant. And that's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about monitoring everybody's mood so that we don't piss anyone off and make them yell at us, or monitoring everyone's mood so that we can be kind of codependent and fix everything and make everything peaceful. It's not a neurotic tuning in. It's a so I can be of benefit to others tuning in. Yeah.
I haven't been in close proximity to His Holiness. I've been to the neuroscience meetings, but not, close enough. But I have been close proximity to Lalanzo Rinpoche, in his house, had dinner with him and chit chat. So like you say, they come across as just very normal, very kind, but also there's a difference. And it's very palpable difference, and you can't put your finger on. It's like there's a different space that you occupy, and I think you just answered my question. There is no I, there's no ego.
Yeah.
I think that's what the difference is that you notice. There's.
I mean, it's hard to
you
say if
come
there's
out,
no
you feel
ego.
like, oh my God, everything about him was normal.
Yeah,
I think,
except
but then
something.
you feel, no, there's a difference. It's something you've never encountered in your,
yeah.
in my 60 years of life.
Yeah, they're not regular.
Yeah.
Right? They're not regular. I mean, I would hesitate to say it's definite they don't have ego, because again, we don't know. We don't know. But sometimes that energetic quality can be bodhicitta, or just really uncontrived compassion, really uncontrived love. I think we've even felt it from ordinary people when they're very grounded, just for a moment, little flickers of it. Like if you've ever been in a really rough spot, like just really distressed, yeah, and one of your closest friends miraculously for once in your life noticed, tuned in, and connected with you when you were in that place with tons of compassion, but with lots of respect, not pitying you, not looking down on you, just holding the space, gave you a hug. There's an energetic quality to that, right, that immediately soothes and grounds you. And that's just a regular person being a bit centered. Yeah, and really having their compassion activated. So see it as a spectrum of skills rather than a magical ability only some people have. It is a magical ability some people have, but it's a spectrum that we've already started on, and we're moving towards that state already, right? That's going to be us. That's the whole point of this. It's practice and consistency. Yeah, and we already can a little bit, just a little bit. So the thing with lamas and gurus too is that when we're doing these practices, we're thinking that the enlightened being that we're visualizing in the space in front is one in nature with our root gurus. So who is a root guru? What is a root guru? What do we do with a root guru? All of these things are really important questions, yeah? And the difficulty is that because you can't really tell who anyone is, you can just make an educated guess. You have to kind of play with the guru-ness also in an archetypal way. So when you're thinking of the guru, what you're trying to think of is those moments in your life where someone else's wisdom has spoken to your wisdom. When there's been like the outer guru meeting the inner guru. It could have even been your kindergarten teacher explaining the alphabet a way that you finally understood. Yeah, and for the first time, your parents had been trying to teach you the alphabet and trying. And then the way your kindergarten teacher said it, you went, oh, I get it now. Yeah, something about their wisdom spoke to your wisdom. That's the guru-ness that we're talking about. Then different teachers in your life, different mentors in your life, maybe even relatives in your life. Maybe it's your grandmother, right? Who is somehow speaking to that inner guru in you. And you were able to recognize wisdom. So there was an external thing, right? There was an external person that was saying something, but what they said had to land somewhere. And what made it land? What made you able to hear wisdom? There had to be you ready to listen. There also had to be some sort of connection between you, and openness and resonance and trust and stuff like that, right? It's a coming together of a lot of conditions. So what you take is the examples in your life, whether spiritual or secular, of when you have been able to recognize wisdom and take it on as your own. And you think that that external condition is embodied by whatever deity you're practicing. Yeah. So that teacher-ness is then taking this form, specifically emphasizing wisdom in this case, or compassion in that case. So when we say the Guru Buddha, that's a lot of what we're talking about. So it might be that the guru that gave you the empowerment is the catalyst for that kind of process of thinking. Yeah, because they are someone who has helped speak to your wisdom, and they were the one that opened the gateway to that particular practice. But it doesn't have to be just them. It can be an amalgamation of all of the teachers of your life so far, kind of combined into one, taking this form. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. So here's the letter D. Okay, all of your karma purified from beginningless time. You're adopting that attitude, even though part of you know that's not true yet. You get so filled up with light. You're like bursting with light, that it leaks out your pores, right? It goes out your pores and goes to all sentient beings, and all of their ignorance is dispelled as well. Even though part of you is like, yeah, but not really. You're like, no, it is. Just for a minute, hold that possibility, hold that future truth, make it so for a moment. Yeah, make it so for a moment, visualize it for a moment, right? Like, be really practical about these things and think, if you want to build a new house, you need an architect's sketch, you need plans, you need a system, you need to be able to visualize how it's going to be. Then you can go ahead and build it. If you just start building it without any plans, it's going to be haphazard and take twice as long and cost so much money, right? So this is your architect's plan. You're visualizing it, then you're bringing it into being. So you're adopting this attitude for a moment. And then you think all of that light collects back, yeah, and then into the syllable D, which then transforms into Manjushri in the space in front. Or if you have the empowerment, you transform into Manjushri. But right now, let's just talk about the space in front. So we're on the top of page 5, and here all of the sentences kind of start with I emerges this, my hand, my blah, blah, blah. You need to just adjust it to Manjushri, in the space in front has these details until you have the empowerment. Yeah. So basically, you're just clarifying the details. And here's a section where if you don't want to be reading it, you don't have to be reading it. Just use the image and bring it up into your mind's eye, you know, and just kind of mentally scan up and down, right? Lotus, sun, moon, Vajra posture, this hand doing this hand doing that, looking beautiful, radiating light, 3-dimensional orange, right? Like, you know, just bring it up into your mind's eye. But you do need to have seen what Manjushri looks like in some depiction. So choose an image, either a statue or a tanka or a postcard that the artist's rendering makes you happy. Right? Like, all images are perfect. All images of the Buddha are perfect, but sometimes the artists are more or less skillful, or the artist's rendering is more, you know, kind of speaking to you or not. So choose an image you like, right? So say this is the image you like. You have a look at it and you're like, yep, details, details, details. Now, what if it was made of light? Okay, yep. And then you put it down and you close your eyes and you bring it to your mind's eye. So don't keep staring at it, right? Bring it to your mind's eye and hold it there. And most important is to think the Guru Buddha is there. And then we add to that idea again with the Om, Ah, Hum syllables, sending out light and inviting all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas to dissolve and merge into that form that we've created. And the idea of wisdom beings coming to absorb into the commitment being is again something you'll see in Tantra again and again in every sadhana, either implicitly or explicitly. So the commitment being is the being that you have visualized with your own mind. The wisdom beings are all of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas who come and dissolve and absorb into that form that you've created. Does that make sense? Yeah. Commitment beings, wisdom beings. Okay, so the mantra Zahum Bam Ho basically means I invite all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, they merge together with what I visualized, and everybody's really happy about it. Okay, that's a very rough translation, but when you see Zahum Bam Ho, it's that merging of what you visualized and all of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas coming to it. Then we make offerings, and the offerings section is related to the practice in Tantra called the 4 purities, which is planting the seeds for your own enlightenment by doing behaviors in alignment with what enlightenment will look like. And also, this is creating the cause for pure resources in the future. So there's a sensory aspect, there's a merit aspect, there's a planting the seeds for your enlightenment aspect, but practically speaking, it's just helping you have a habit of generosity. Yeah. So when you see these water bowls all over the place, and I mentioned it briefly yesterday, interwoven when we did our 7-limb prayer meditation, but the Buddhas don't need you to make offerings, do they? They don't care, right? They're fine. They don't need water, right? And they don't need you to be making things towards them in order for them to love you or something. It's not placating an angry God. You're not making a sacrifice on the altar. It's nothing weird like that. It's about you value the Buddhist path. You want to become a Buddha. Buddhas already exist, By making them offerings, you're reminding yourself that you value it. Yeah. You know, the corporate philosophy of if you pay a lot of money for something, people become more invested in it. A little bit like that, only altruistic. So we use water because water is not going to trigger our miserly feeling or our feelings of deprivation, but we still value it. Yeah, we value water. We know water is really important. So it's a beautiful, wonderful offering, but it's not going to trigger a sense of, oh, now I'm poor. Yeah. And then we can add to that flowers and incense and light and anything. But really what we're talking about is using the traditional things a VIP would be given in ancient India and then bringing a psychology to it. Because really what the Buddhas want is for you to practice. And they want you to practice so that you stop suffering. So the best offering to the Buddhas is practice. Yes. So yes, water, flowers, light, all of these things, but they really represent practices that are going to make you heal and transform. So water for washing is like connecting with purification, bathing feet or bathing the whole body. Sometimes there's a bath offering in these practices. It's really about triggering a sense of purification. Then water for drinking is about taking merit and blessings and all the good stuff, right? So you got your two waters. And then flowers are very much about wanting the open heart of compassion. Yeah. So yes, flowers are beautiful and the sensory experience of flowers can trigger attachment, and we're trying to work with that on the tantric path. And really what we're talking about too is the open heart of compassion. And then incense is related to the practice of ethics. They say when you have very pure ethics, you're reborn as someone who has the sweet scent of morality, right? And so incense is related to that. Light is light dispelling the darkness of ignorance. Scented water or perfume is offered to the heart center of the Buddhas. And the heart center is said to be kind of where the mind mainly resides. Right. And so by offering perfume to the heart center, we're indicating that we want a mind of faith and not blind faith, faith-based in reason, faith-based in experience, but wanting a mind of faith and having a mind of faith gives you a lot of energy in your practice, right? Then food is like for the food of samadhi, right? Or the results of meditation. And music is for like harmonious communities and harmony in general. So that's one layer of meaning. Yeah. If you don't remember all that, it doesn't really matter. What you're thinking is, may I adopt the attitude that generosity is a habit I want? Yeah. May I adopt the attitude that all of the sensory things I normally crave, I can release. Yeah. And then when you get further into Tantra, there's more and more layers to it. And there's more and more visualizations to it. But it's variations on a theme. And then we make a praise. And again, the Buddhas do not need us to praise them. They feel very good about themselves. They need no validation, okay? And they don't need you to praise them so that, you know, they will like you. It's nothing like that. And I know that's probably obvious, but sometimes you read it and you're like, why am I making obeisance? Right, whatever. Yeah, but these thoughts can arise and probably should arise because we don't want to be fundamentalists and we don't want to be weird religious people. We want to be friendly religious people, right? Not weird ones, right? And maybe we don't even like the word religion. We have to identify as spiritual because that word's too loaded for us, whatever, like it's your life. But a praise is important. Why do you think? Why would you make a praise to someone who doesn't need a praise?
To generate the feeling of awesomeness.
Mm-hmm.
So we practice.
Yeah, absolutely. Inspiration is a huge piece. Like, here are the amazing qualities that already exist in some beings. They are also qualities I want to have, aspire to, and will be. That's definitely one piece. Yeah. Inspiration. Another piece is merit, right? Because your mind is turning towards that aspiration. It generates a lot of positive karma. Yeah. It increases your connection with this particular deity. So it's again this idea, like with prostration, that you become receptive to what you respect. right? Like we stand up when the teacher comes, even if it doesn't really matter who the teacher is. Like we could each take turns sitting here being the teacher because we all have something to offer each other. But when you stand up when whoever the teacher is comes in, it prepares your mind to be receptive, and it says, this is something more important than the usual things I'm listening to. Yeah, it already elevates, right? So it's not about who the person is, it's about what they represent, right? And then that person, whoever they are, prostrates to the altar, showing their respect and receptivity to the whole path to enlightenment and everyone who's become enlightened before them. They sit down, and then everyone prostrates to them. Doesn't mean they're enlightened, doesn't even mean they're your teacher. It means they're representing the Dharma in this moment, and probably they have vows of ordination. And by prostrating in that way, you become receptive and also reinforce your connection to the Dharma and reinforce your connection to renunciation, which is what the vows represent when you're looking at them, right? When you're looking at someone with these vows. So it's like your process. Yeah, it's not really about doing the right etiquette, right? The right etiquette is just ways of getting your mind into the right headspace. So if suddenly we became paraplegic and weren't able to stand when the teacher comes and weren't able to prostrate when the teacher sits, it doesn't mean you couldn't do this practice, because the main practice is mental anyway. Do you know what I mean? So the praise is a similar idea where you're developing this mind of receptivity, respect and receptivity, which implies aspiration as well. Yeah. Yeah, and so then we do the mantra, similar as usual. And then the addition here that wasn't in the Chenrezig practice is the Vajrasattva mantra just once. And this Vajrasattva mantra will be in most tantric sadhanas at some point, which is quite handy, because no doubt in some point in the practice you vagued out or got a funny idea about something, or just kind of like tripped over your words or whatever. And this is just clearing any mistakes you made during the practice itself. Yeah. And then you dedicate. And with all dedications, you try to remember emptiness at the end, whether it's written or not. Okay, so anything about the Manjushri practice before we shift and look at these 7 types of wisdom? Or about what we've done so far. Yesterday, we were talking a lot about overcoming self-cherishing. And the main antidote to self-cherishing is bodhicitta and compassion. Today, we're focusing on overcoming self-grasping, which is really related to overcoming ignorance. So before we kind of get into all of that, is self-cherishing clear and why it's a problem?
It's clear, it's still a problem.
Yeah, it's sure, definitely still a problem. Yeah, definitely for all of us. Yeah. Self-cherishing is really prioritizing yourself at the expense of others, with indifference to others, oblivious to others, that which comes from self-grasping, which views the self as inherently existent. So you view the self as inherently existent and grasp onto that, then you need to cherish such a self, because it seems like who else will? If you didn't have self-grasping ignorance, then you wouldn't have that feeling of separation. You wouldn't have that feeling of duality. Without the feelings of separation and duality, you don't have attachment and aversion, that push and pull feeling. Without push and pull dominating your life, there would be no need to have self-cherishing. Like you wouldn't have to tell yourself, think of others. Others would be obvious. You wouldn't have to say to yourself, me first, because who is me? I'm interconnected. There still is me, but it's relative. Yeah. So when we're talking about the self that exists and the self that doesn't exist, it's important to be clear about what we're talking about. The self that doesn't exist at all, even relatively, is what?
Exists. Relatively.
No, more. What doesn't exist at all? What kind of self doesn't exist at all?
I was born because my mother thought that and created like a biological entity, and her consciousness gave it.
That is related to the relative self, and that one's there. I could pinch you and you'd say, ouch. Yeah. What's the self that doesn't exist? Yeah. Yeah. The independent self doesn't exist. Yeah. The inherently existent self does not exist at all. Like not even nominally, not even relatively. There is no inherently existent self. Self-grasping says, but there is. And self-cherishing says, then I'll save you. Do you see? Right? Yeah. So the feeling is that you are inherently existent. That's the feeling, right? You view the relative self, which exists relatively. The relative self is simply that which is labeled on the collection of parts, like the body from your parents, like the mind that's dependently arisen. Those things exist relatively. You can label self there. There's no problem. Merely labeled by the mind. The problem is that we view that relative self and we superimpose inherence to it. Yeah, we add a sense of independence to it that has never been there.
This is just our school of thought, right? Because within Mahayana tradition, there are schools that feel that consciousness exists, isn't it?
There are different tenet schools about the layers of no self. All schools of Buddhism believe that the self is empty and selfless, but what they think empty and selfless means will vary. Yeah, for sure. No school of Buddhism believes that there's an independent, unitary, permanent self. None of the schools of Buddhism believe that.
What about the inherited existence of the mind? I thought some schools believe.
Sometimes when they talk about the mind, it's as if the mind is the illustration of the self and that the mind is inherently existent. Some of them are coarse in that way. Our school of thought is the Prasangika view in the Gelugpa tradition. And it is a delicate dance because you're kind of like tiptoeing right to the edge of nihilism and then pulling back just gently, but it's right on the edge. But it's not nihilism, but it's close. And for Tantra to work, you do need the correct view of emptiness. For Tantra to work, you of course need renunciation and bodhicitta. So that correct view of emptiness doesn't have to be accessed immediately in its subtlest form right away. You can work your way up, right? You can start with, how about there are parts of me that I've just projected as me and they aren't actually solid, independent things. You can start even more surface than philosophy. Just start with regular garden variety, how you see your own personality as inherently existent. Has anyone like forced you to do the Myers-Briggs or something? And you think, oh, that's my personality inherently, that's who I am. And you're like, well, sort of in a certain context, dependently arisen. Yeah, that's how I'm trending. I'm trending INFP, for those of you that are curious. I'm trending that way, but that's not who I am, right? That's just who I am so far. That's what the collection of conditions has kind of come together to be. But if I think that's who I am innately, I'm stuck there. So you can say this is just who I am, but add so far. Yeah.
So if I'm understanding correctly, what we're canceling is for no reason at all. It just happened.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah. Yeah.
I just am because they
Yeah, exactly.
out of nothing, out of nowhere.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the one we're canceling with no void.
Yeah, yeah. Rio's saying the one that we're canceling is the one that seems to have just come out of nowhere. The self that came out of nowhere, just fully fledged, here I am, ping. Yeah, there's no spontaneously core permanent self from a Buddhist perspective at all whatsoever. There is a self. It's not that one. Yeah, just merely labeled by the mind, right? So realizing emptiness is realizing that the self is empty of that independence or empty of that inherence. It's not thinking there is no self whatsoever relatively. But what we need to remember about the two truths, ultimate truth is related to emptiness. Relative truth is deceptive, but the deception is not from the side of the things. The deception is from our own mind's projection. So when you hear relative truth, you have to hear deceptive truth. Yeah. The deception is that things appear as inherently existent. And the word appear is tricky because it feels like sight. It's more like a seeming. things seem to be inherently existent. And there's so many ways that we can look at just very surface level conditioning and see how it plays out all the time. Like you could say, this is inherently a beautiful flower, inherently from its own side, a beautiful flower. But if you, I don't know, had a relationship that they always brought you red roses and red roses were your thing, and then suddenly they betrayed you and cheated on you. Now, when you see red roses, you're like, they're not beautiful. I don't like them, right? Yeah, it's like not from their own side. And if as a child, you were never introduced to the concept of these particular plants being the fancy ones, you might just as easily think random other plants were the fancy ones and be like, oh, special, right? So it's like not from its own side special. We were introduced to the specialness, believed it, reinforced it, and now it seems to be that way from its direction. When it's really from our direction, we're telling it what it is. What it seems like is that it's telling us what it is. Do you feel what I'm saying, right? So the same is true of everything, is that it seems to be telling us what it is. We're telling it what it is through our projections. Yeah.
Yes, good morning, Venerable. I wanted to ask you a question about these topics that you are explaining to us. It's landed very good, and thank you for that. What is the relation between ultimate truth and us looking at the relative truth and the Four Noble
The Four Noble
truth.
Relative truth and ultimate truth are two aspects that everything that exists has, right? So the relative truth of this is that it's a singing bowl. Yeah, its ultimate truth is it's empty of inherent existence. So its relative truth is merely labeled by the mind. It's a singing bowl. And its relative truth and its ultimate truth live in the same place. Yeah. So the deception is that when you look at it, it seems obvious what it is. All right. That's the problem. It seems obvious. And that obvious feeling isn't its basic name of being a singing bowl. The real problem is that it seems to be something that arose in and of itself. It seems like it's divorced from its causes and conditions. Like it's always been here sitting on this table. Just 2 seconds of analysis, that's not true. But before any kind of analysis, it's like it's always been here the whole time, magically born out of nowhere. Yeah. And so the ultimate truth is that it's empty of inherent existence. Because why? Because it's dependently arisen. What does dependently arisen mean? It arises in dependence upon its parts and its context and a mind to label it and a basis to label on. And for impermanent things, it also depends upon causes and conditions. Permanent things don't depend on causes and conditions, but they're still empty. This is an impermanent phenomena. It's changing moment to moment. So it's also dependent upon causes and conditions. So dependent arising explains why things are empty. Yeah. And so when we're talking about the Four Noble Truths, the truth of suffering and the truth of origin are related to relative truth. The truth of cessation and the truth of path are related to ultimate truth. So because of the relative truths, we need to realize the ultimate truths to then destroy the problem of suffering, karma, and its effects, as well as delusions. And that is a very short explanation of something that requires its own course, yeah. But just very briefly, yeah. First 2 relative, second 2 related to ultimate. But, don't get too concrete about it because relative truths have their ultimate aspect, yeah. Okay. Yeah, and those, last 2 that are related to ultimate truth have their relative aspect because you got to practice them in the real world, yeah. Gently, okay? Which is why we need the 7 types of wisdom, okay? Why we need the 7 types of wisdom, which are on page 9 of the Orange Manjushri Siddhana.
Thank you.
Yeah. These aren't really the same as the 8 verses that we did yesterday. These are more a prayer. they're a prayer to yourself. And I mean, not to say that the verses aren't, but this is a prayer to yourself for what is it that you want in order to enact the benefit of others? What is it you want to overcome in order to enact the welfare of yourself and others? When you're doing something like the 8 verses of thought transformation, it's kind of like your radical reframing. When you're doing something like this, it's a little bit more direct. This is what I want. Yeah. And it seems as though you're praying to the divine to give you something, when in fact, what you're trying to do is open up the pathways of communication so those burgeoning forms can grow and develop. You're also asking yourself to pay attention to these as priorities. So you're inviting blessings with each of these prayers. And so you first just say the prayer, and then they have a visualization that goes with them. And the visualization that goes with them helps bless your mind to achieve these things. But remember that a blessing is basically just your mind transforming. A blessing means that which makes the penny drop or gives you the ring of truth. It's something that was already there and now has woken up into reality and integration. And that is not necessarily coming from the outside. It's supported by the outside. But it's really that repetition again and again and again builds a kind of critical mass, which shifts something from your head to your heart. Yeah. So blessings, yes, they're coming from the outside in a sense, but just as in the sense that when you water a seed, it helps it grow, but there had to be a seed there, and you were the one that planted the seed. Yeah. So the first one is, please grant me blessings to achieve great understanding, which is able to understand and explain the meanings of the extensive scriptures without resistance. So understand and explain the meanings of the extensive scriptures without resistance. So this is kind of like, may I be a good student? May I be a good teacher, right? And to be a good teacher, you must be a good student. Yeah. And if you're a good student, you can be a good teacher. And the best way to be a student is to think about, were I to explain this to someone, what would I say? Were I to explain this to someone, what would I say? Which is not an invitation to tell people stuff. Yeah, it's not. You got to wait to be asked, right? The same premise of all forms of Buddhism about being requested holds. We do not teach unless we are asked, right? Do not give unsolicited advice, right? Think about how that's gone in your life so far. Hit and miss, am I right? Like occasionally unsolicited advice has been quite helpful, but often people are like, yeah, thanks, mate. Nah, right? When have you heard advice, right? Like really make it personal. Like when have you been able to listen to someone and take on board what they said?
When you're asked.
And it's also when you were like 90% there,
Yeah.
right? And they helped you close the gap. They kind of already knew the answer, almost, not quite. You helped them close the gap, that extra 10% of wisdom, and you asked. Yeah. Sometimes they blew your mind with something that you never expected and you weren't even close to understanding, but all the ingredients were there. Yeah. So when we're sitting in class and we're going to a teaching or something, we do refuge in bodhicitta, and often we offer a mandala and we do all this song and dance. And it's really about saying, I'm asking personal advice, not general knowledge. I'm asking, how do I transform my mind? So we really, when we're asking for this kind of wisdom, this great understanding wisdom, you're asking to be both good student and both teacher for the sake of all sentient beings. But then you're letting that live in potentiality, and you're not doing anything outside with it until the opportunities present themselves. Yeah. And you're really waiting for openness. Yeah. And when you're with your friends and family, especially the ones who are not Buddhist, don't tell them about Buddhism unless they really want to know. Yeah. And if they ask you something, answer what was asked and then put a punctuation mark, right? And don't be like, oh, good, they asked, yay. Like, but I mean, the thing is you really want to ask yourself, what can I do to benefit sentient beings through who I am? Because that is the most consistent way of teaching. Just who you are. Yeah. And if you say everything perfectly and precisely, it's not going to have a lot of impact if it's not integrated. Think about something like a cliche we've all heard, like do unto others the way you would like done unto you, treat others the way you want to be treated. Some cliche that you've heard since you were a child, right? Someone could say that to you and it sound like a cliche. And a realized being or someone who's integrated that could say it to you and it strike you as the most profound thing you've ever heard. It's not about the words, it's about the words being integrated and then shared in a timely way. Yeah. So, and of the, tons of teachings of whatever subjects you've all been to in your life, what words have actually stuck with you? Or has it been more about an experience? You might have been to a conference for 10 days and only remember 1 or 2 sentences of what speakers said. And it was those 1 or 2 sentences that both had the ring of truth coming from their own experience and landed in what you already had receptivity for. And the rest of it was just about the experience, but very little of the words and content stick. Am I right? So the question is why and what sticks? And of course, we want more and more to land and stick. But, when we're thinking about how can we benefit others, it's very rarely about what we say. It's much more about how we are. Yeah. And how we are gradually invites a question or invites an openness. Yeah. And isn't it true that once we find something cool, we want to tell everyone, of course, we're nice people, we want to share. But when does it have the chance to go in, right? So the next one is, please grant me blessings to achieve clear wisdom, which can understand and clarify the details of very subtle and extremely difficult points without resistance. So this is going a bit deeper with the fact that we don't just want to understand, we actually have to go into the depths of the meaning. So there's something in Buddhism called the 4 reliances, which is basically don't rely on the teacher alone, rely on the teachings. Not the words, but the meaning. Not just the relative truth, but the ultimate truth. And not just what you've heard, but actually the deep realization of it. So these 4 reliances are really asking you to not just live on the surface of content, to always bring in everything else that you know about Dharma to each subtle new point that you're hearing. So if you're hearing, treat others the way you want to be treated, you could bring in, which lacks inherent existence. Yeah. If you didn't bring in that lacks inherent existence, then you could fall into the trap of thinking, I'll be really literal about that, treating others the way I want to be treated. I really want a sandwich right now. I'm going to force feed everyone a sandwich. Like you could get too literal. Yeah. If you're remembering dependently arisen, right? So what is the deep thing? Oh, everyone wants to be treated with respect. But what does respect look like? For one person, it looks like giving them space and time. For another person, it looks like giving them attention and words. Then you go even deeper. What do people really want? Oh, they want to be free of suffering. Who am I to say what is suffering for one person and happiness to another? I can say generally speaking, but when we get into the individual, it's very unique. So you go layer and layer and layer and layer. And what you realize is that everything is related to context. So you stop getting that fixated mind of, here's what I do in these situations. It's more like, how do I be internally? And then I'll know what to do in an individual situation. I don't preempt the present moment with the patterns I've seen so far in my life. I use the patterns I've seen so far as information, but I don't let myself get into that default thing of I've seen it all before, therefore I know what to do now. So it's interesting. It's really inviting layers. Then the third one is, please grant me blessings to achieve quick wisdom, which quickly cuts the non-understanding and wrong understanding and doubts without resistance. So again, it's not about not having doubts. It's about not indulging in that kind of like circular doubt thing where you just can't let something go and you keep picking at it. It's like, have the doubts, sharpen the horns of the dilemma, and kind of cut through all of that sort of surface fat of the nonsense. Yeah. Like you're sort of trimming a piece of meat, although we don't eat meat, right? But trimming. So you get to the core of what's the issue really right now. Yeah. Not my memory of all the other times I've had doubt in my life, but right now, what's the doubt? And I have this quick wisdom that cuts non-understanding and wrong understanding. Yeah. So our relationship to doubt is a very fascinating thing to start playing with, because it can be the gateway to wisdom, or it can be the gateway to madness. Yeah. So doubt is not to be feared. It's just, how do you relate to your own doubt? And sometimes doubt can be a form of indulgence, where you say, I'm not totally sure about that, so I'm not going to really do anything. Yeah. And really the only way to clarify doubts is to get more information and more experience. So sometimes you have to say, I know enough to start, and then maybe the doubts will clarify themselves. Yeah, you're not going to know everything about everything before you start. So there has to be a certain point in which you just call it and say, okay, I'm going to start now. Let's see. And then the doubts get clearer. So then grant me blessings to achieve profound wisdom, which can understand and explain the meanings of the scriptures with depth and without resistance, related to as above. Grant me blessings to achieve the wisdom to explain the Dharma that gives definite, supreme understanding of all the meanings of all the words of the scriptures without existence. And this can really relate to kind of being a little bit more proactive about going to the depths. So take like a classic, I don't know, dinner party scenario, a dinner party conversation. In a dinner party conversation, you could, all of you, friends and family, could revert to your same old kind of like gossipy, critical, raging about politics, talking about whatever celebrities, talking about the weather, or talking about the sports, whatever series of topics you normally talk about at a dinner party, which are maybe not necessarily good or bad in and of themselves, but it's like you've covered the ground. Yes. You know what I'm saying, right? Classic dinner party conversation, whatever it is. This kind of wisdom could be about, how can I think about the people in this room and what would interest them, and actually elevate the conversation to something new. Something about ideas, something about connections, something about working for the greater good that would not be condescending or patronizing or out of sync with who these people are who are in front of me. Knowing my audience, reading the room, but elevating the conversation out of the same old just rubbish that normally you talk about and you've covered a million times. Yeah. Or like asking a question that opens up a new sort of way of thinking. Yeah, sometimes it's much more about asking than telling. But just, bringing this real into your daily life. Like, don't we want that? Sometimes when you're sitting at a dinner party, you're like, it's nice to see everybody, but like, I feel like we've covered this ground. Yeah. So-and-so and her stupid boyfriend. So-and-so and her dying dog. Yeah. This sports team, that celebrity, this political figure, how people are, what's going on in the world, even things that seem like important, like say you're used to talking about climate change. I'm guessing you're already talking in an echo chamber of people who already agree with you, right? If they already agree with you, must it be said again? How can you open up a new pathway of what shall we do about it, right? How shall we think about it? How can we let the fact that the world is really heating up and getting a little scary not disturb our inner peace? Yeah, stuff like that, right? So this kind of thing is worth exploring, because this isn't just the profound end of the path stuff. This is the nitty-gritty of your daily life stuff too. So then the next one is, please grant me blessings to achieve debating wisdom, which enables one to achieve bravery over evil debate without resistance. So sometimes at said dinner party, there'll be one random family member or friend who is dominant and a bit of a bumhead, right? Right? They might really be the one that like makes the conversation toxic. Do you know the one? Mm-hmm. Yeah. We all have that one. Sometimes we're that one, right? But like, it was all going so well until so-and-so showed up, right? But they have charisma, or they have power, or they have a dominant kind of vibe, and they can just take over the whole conversation and it takes a turn. Do you know this? Mm-hmm. This debating wisdom, you're having the bravery to call them on it. And you're also having the skill to cut through that nonsense and interrupt the momentum without hurting them. you're intimidating their affliction, not the person. Yeah, it's the Manjushri sword, right? With the wisdom, you're cutting through ignorance, but you're not hurting them. And you don't need to win. You're not leaving behind the compassion of yesterday. You're not needing to win. You're not needing to be triumphant. You're actually trying to get to their good, kind heart underneath all that bravado. Do you know what I'm saying? And so what we want is to be brave enough to experiment a little bit and see, can we change the tone of a conversation? It might involve a great sense of humor. You might need a lot of lightness and playfulness to get someone to knock it off. And for some people, you might need a little bit of wrath, right? Not anger, but, you know, a kind of your own dominant appearance to say enough. Yeah, but not harming them. For others, you might just have a gentle nudge and change the topic and they don't even notice that's happened. So it's, again, you're not preempting the present moment with, here is my plan. Next time they go on that rant, I'm going to do this. You can have a loose plan, but you have to know that things always change in the moment and it might not work. But if you have this bravery, you're kind of like, whatever, let's try. Let's try. Like, again, death is coming. Like, do we need to have this again happen at the dinner party? Yeah, snap out of it, right? So debating wisdom, achieve bravery over evil debate without resistance. This is something really interesting to explore because it's also, how does society change? Is through gently elevating the conversation and opening the heart of the people around us, and that having a ripple effect. And also being open enough to, when someone else is in a better mental space than us, to be elevated, you know? And sometimes it's like whatever kids are in your family come out with these like amazing little gems of wisdom because they're kids, everyone's like, oh, that's cute and idealistic. You'll get jaded, don't worry, right? When in fact, you could actually be the one that gives that attention and is like, well said, tiny grasshopper. Yes, everyone, you know, and actually because they love the little one, they might be less likely to be kind of toxic about the conversation. It might be, let's all collaborate to support the little one and their wisdom, but actually everyone else is elevated by that as well. Yeah. So it's important to really think about how can we change the tone of things, because we can be a powerful influence in whatever circle of people we're around every day. And I think it's important, if we're on a bodhisattva path or attempting a bodhisattva path, to take responsibility to do that and not be passive. What do you think?
I was just, as you were explaining about how Manjushri is bringing, he's bringing the sword down to cut ignorance. And yet, and you were saying you do it in a very wisdom way, right? Yeah. Not by anger. And I noticed, like, when you look at his face, it's actually very peaceful.
Yeah, exactly.
There's no anger, there's no fierceness, like, and yet he's bringing a sword down. So
exactly, he's at peace with it. Yeah, exactly.
He's just trying to, I guess, cut the ignorance, but without, projecting any anger or frustration.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And it's good to notice that about the iconography, right? It's not by accident. Yeah, it's not by accident. Yeah.
Related to that, is there a full version of Manjushri?
Yes. There is. There is a Rothfull version of Manjushri. It is Yamantaka. Yes, who has 16 legs and 34 arms and looks like a buffalo and is got a halo of flames. Yep, there is a Rothfull version of Manjushri. Approach with caution. Yes, this is the highest Yoga Tantra form. There's also a Rothfull aspect of Chenrezig. Yeah, there's Rothfull aspects of all of the deities, and we really shouldn't practice the Rothfull aspects of the deities until we can practice the peaceful aspects. And even this peaceful aspect has a sword. Yeah, it's not taking any crap, right? It's like, enough, right? We've had this conversation before. Enough. I've been this vague before. Enough. Let's try something different. Yeah. So there's still action. There's still power. But yeah, kind, sweet, peaceful. If you get good at that version, then elevate. Yeah. But yeah, Yamataka is full on. And then you're really inviting yourself to be able to look at your anger more deeply, which sometimes means it's really scary to see how much anger you have, especially in our society where anger is not very socially acceptable. Like being fiery and spicy is, kind of the realm of people who have a Mediterranean background or Middle Eastern background or something. They're allowed to be spicy and fiery and have fun. We are not allowed to be angry if we've been raised Northern European kind of socialization. We're allowed to be depressed, though. We are definitely allowed to be depressed. And what is depression but inverted anger, right? So just because you think you don't have anger, check. Do you have depression? Occasionally? Sometimes? Often? Yeah, no, that's anger. Yeah, that's attachment not getting what it wants. And instead of exploding, it's imploding. And it is a suffering and it is horrible and it deserves all the compassion in the world, but don't pretend that you don't have anger just because you're polite. Yeah. So when you're starting to elevate your practices in Tantra and starting to look at the wrathful forms of deities, make sure you've done your sutra level work of, have I explored my habits of anger? Have I looked at my stuff? Because if it roars to the surface and the energy that accompanies it is kind of unfamiliar, it might kind of blow my socks off and make me a little ungrounded. Yeah, so it just gently. And so with all of these levels of Tantra, this level, this Kriya Tantra level, this is the amount of negative emotion that would come about by seeing an object that would trigger it. Yeah, just by seeing, not coming any closer, not hearing, not touching, not anything, just seeing something that you don't like. How much control do you have? Yeah, depends on the day, doesn't it? Yeah, so don't get any closer until you're ready. But gently. Okay, so then we have writing wisdom, and this one's kind of interesting. To make meaning and sound perfect and gives clear understanding and happiness. And these kind of communication aspirations, I think, are really beautiful to explore because we don't really think that we're necessarily grand writers, but how often are we texting and emailing? I mean, constantly texting and emailing. Do people always understand what we mean in our texts? Have we had misunderstandings related to texts and emails? Are people hearing tone? Are they hearing intention? Are they getting offended? Maybe we're not too bad. Maybe we space our sentences well and use good grammar and punctuation and, emojis, right? This is a happy sentence, smiley face, right? Maybe, but this is a deeper thing of, am I able to convey what I want to communicate skillfully? In the written sense, but also in the verbal sense, is what I mean conveyed. And the more Manjushri you do, I think the more tidy your communication becomes. And there's a lot to be said for doing a lot of Manjushri practice if you're writing something, if you're studying something. But it's really interesting to kind of play with this and see, can I get a little bit clearer and more specific, more honest, more transparent in everything that I say and write? That kind of Manjushri energy. Questions about the 7 wisdoms? Yeah, go ahead.
Just noticed the last one, the orange nectar beans are coming from Lama Tsongkhapa and his 2 sons instead of from Manjushri. Can you speak to that?
Yes, now we're going to the visualizations. So the visualizations of the 7 wisdoms change. And if it's all a bit too much and it's all a bit too involved, you can just think orange light. Okay, orange light. But the orange nectar light for each of these can also be clarified in specific forms. Sometimes it's the mantra, sometimes it's the mantra garland with the spokes of sharp cutting edges, yeah, like what you see on the cover of your text. Sometimes it's just like texts and things like this, but each one has their own specific visualization. And so on a day when you don't have a lot of mental space, gentle nectar. On a day that you've got more space, add more elaboration and detail. When you get to the last one, you're going into Lama Tsongkhapa, who is an emanation of Manjushri, or a disciple of Manjushri, or both, depending on your perspective. But Lama Tsongkhapa is famous for having taken all of the teachings of the Buddha and then arranging them in a linear order. Practice this first, this second, this third. He wasn't the first one to do that. Atisha wrote The Lamp of the Path, and that was a remarkable text. But Lama Tsongkhapa's 3-volume work, The Great Treatise on the Stages of the Path to Enlightenment, takes the Buddha's whole 40 years of teachings and makes it into 3 volumes. And it's so tidy and elegant and precise. So he's kind of the representation of what's the best thing you could write. That's a good thing to have written. I would like to write something that good, or in that way. Yeah, so he is one in nature with Manjushri. It's not like we've suddenly done a pivot and now we're doing a whole other practice. He's still Manjushri, but in the form of Lama Tsongkhapa because of his writing ability. That makes sense. Yeah.
What about that? The word nectar, how do you visualize light being nectar like?
Yeah, Dutsi, nectar is probably not a conversation for a general group per se. At this level, nectar and light, think nectar as light.
Nectar as light.
Yeah, at this stage, nectar as light. And light that, stimulates and ripens positive seeds. So it's nectar that somehow has a tiny bit of weight, right? Some sort of stimulating and purifying ability to this light. But in the visualization, just think of nectar as light.
Because to me, it always implies liquid. I was like honey or something.
Yeah. No,
Don't do that.
At this point, just think light. Yeah, light, like you're standing under a nice sunbeam or something like that. Yeah, but in this case, orange. Yeah, orange nectar light. And with the orange nectar light, like say, for example, in the first one, great understanding in the form of orange colored nectar beams, clarified as pure Lord Manjushri, is emitted from Manjushri, absorbs into me, fills my whole body. Then atoms of nectars, which are clarified as pure Lord Manjushri, radiate out to the victorious ones and their sons, meaning Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. Thus, great understanding of the victorious ones and their sons, in the forms of the deity's holy bodies, absorbs into me and fills my whole body, which is a little bit verbose, which is basically, there's Manjushri. Manjushri sends orange light. With the orange light is a ton of miniature Manjushris carried with the light. Yeah, you get filled up, send them out. Yeah, and then the next one, orange nectar light carrying mantra garlands. Yeah, so they're all in the nature of light too. So it's like orange nectar light with Omarapatsana D, tons of Omarapatsana Ds coming in. Does it make sense? It's all in the nature of light. So with each one of these, you're thinking that the radiating light is that outside wisdom is coming in, meeting your inside wisdom, stimulating and growing and ripening it. And then you are able to kind of radiate out. Yeah. So when you're not empowered, when you don't have the empowerment, you can just kind of think that all of this nectar light is coming to you, purifying you, stimulating all of your positive states of mind and wisdom. And then also from Manjushri in front, that's going out to everybody. So if you are, there's a few different ways to approach it. But if you don't have the empowerment, at no point are you thinking that you are Manjushri yet, but you are thinking that your wisdom is being stimulated. You are thinking that you're getting purified. But really the one doing the work is Manjushri at this stage in the space in front. Yeah. So I know it's a little bit clunky sometimes before you have the empowerment, but at least it means you get kind of familiar with the practices. And then if you want to dive all the way in, you kind of know what you're doing. Yeah. So when you're doing this practice, and we're not going to do the long version in this session, we're just going to do the little shorty. But when you are doing the long version, basically you plug it in, the 7 wisdoms. You plug it in, where is it here? On page 7, during the mantra recitation time, before you do the purification mantra. So you don't need to do the 7 wisdoms, but you're feeling like you need a bit of backup and you want to do the 7 wisdoms, you plug it in there. Yeah, and it even says see pages 9 through 11 for a more elaborate explanation, right? So that's where you'd plug it in. And we'll do that after lunch. Okay, so